"The best gift you could give at your brother's wedding is to disappear from this family forever." The words, amplified through the microphone, were like a spell that stopped time itself. The one who said it, the bride, my new sister-in-law, Tracy, stood in her pure white gown, smiling with angelic innocence. From the head table, she gazed straight at me. Everyone held their breath, forks frozen in midair. I saw an elderly woman at the next table press a trembling hand to her lips, disbelief in her eyes. But the silence that followed wasn't broken by gasps of sympathy or murmurs of outrage. It was broken by laughter. My mother, Hillary, was shaking with laughter as if she were watching the finest comedy. Then my father, Dan, joined in with a low chuckle, and finally, my brother, the groom, Aaron, let out a crude, celebratory whistle. It wasn't spontaneous. It was perfectly timed, as if they'd rehearsed it. A cruel little symphony of three. Taking the cue from that deranged reaction of the family, the guests, who at first looked on with confusion and pity, gradually caught on and began to laugh along, swept up by the atmosphere. Curious eyes, contemptuous smiles, the cheap thrill of a public spectacle. All of it pierced straight into me, sitting alone in the corner of the reception hall, like 1,000 sharpened spears. The irony was suffocating, and it made my stomach churn. The pure white roses on the altar were the ones I'd negotiated with the florist 3 times to keep within budget. The rich sauce on the roast beef everyone praised? I'd spent sleepless nights perfecting it with the chef. Every inch of this perfect, blissful day was built with my blood, my sweat, and what little money I had left. They had used my money to build a grand stage for my own exile. Amid the humiliating laughter, my heart was eerily calm. Yes, this ending should have been predictable, because it had all begun years ago, on the day I sacrificed everything to save their store. Back then, I was just about to start my own independent marketing consultancy, but Aaron's reckless spending and my parents' incompetent management had driven our family's grocery, Erie Grocery, my grandfather's legacy, to the brink of collapse. While they could only wail helplessly, I scrapped my own plans and stepped in to rebuild. It wasn't out of pity. It was a calculated move to prove my worth and take the reins of the family. I resurrected that dying store with modern marketing strategies, refining the target demographic, leveraging social media, and pushing sales to record highs. But the moment the crisis passed, they turned on me. One night, my father said, "A man should be running this place," and my mother added, "You did fine, dear, but Aaron has a real flair for leadership." All my painstaking work was reduced to a single word: fine. And the store I had revived was effortlessly handed over to my brother. That was the moment I understood. To them, I was nothing but a temporary tool, useful only in times of crisis. Once they no longer needed me, I was pushed aside again. My mind drifted back to the banquet hall, filled with their laughter. Yes, I had always known what kind of people they were. Then why? Why hadn't I left? Why had I lent them my grandfather's property at a discount for this wedding and given them $10,000 without hesitation? It was because of the last, and perhaps the most foolish hope that lingered within me. A lingering illusion, almost like a curse of blood ties, that I somehow still believed in. Even after Aaron had seized control of the store, I continued to work as just another employee. I endured him barking orders at me in front of customers, and my parents dismissed every suggestion I made with a laugh. One day, they might recognize the mistakes they had made. That fragile hope chained me to this rotten family. This wedding had been my final gamble. When Aaron and Tracy begged me to produce the perfect wedding, I thought this was my chance. If I poured in everything, my connections, my skill, my savings, and created a day so flawless it took their breath away, then maybe they'd finally see my worth. So I lent them my grandfather's apartment and office space in downtown Erie for less than half the market rate. I handled the negotiations with all the vendors for the wedding, which totaled $150,000, and even paid the first $10,000 as a deposit. They accepted it all as their due, without so much as a thank you. And now this is how it ends: a public execution. My last hope trampled underfoot in the cruelest way imaginable. And yet, strangely, I don't feel despair. What I feel is freedom. With Tracy's words, the curse that had bound me for so long, the curse called family, was finally broken. The fog that once clouded my path has lifted. Now I can finally see the way forward. There was nothing left to wager. From then on, it was my game. When the storm of laughter reached its peak, I rose slowly from my chair. No hysteria, no tears, just silence and composure. At that movement, the murmur in the room faltered for just a moment. Feeling every gaze fixed squarely on me, I slowly scanned the faces of my family at the head table, one by one. Tracy's triumphant smirk, Aaron's vulgar laugh, and my parents nodding with satisfaction. Then I spoke to them, and to everyone in the room, with a single phrase, without a microphone, yet resonant and unwavering. Don't regret this. The words sank into the eerie quiet like stones into still water. No one quite understood what I meant. Was it a threat? A bitter surrender? My family exchanged brief glances, then scoffed, laughing through their noses as if it were all a joke. I said nothing more. I picked up my bag from the table, grabbed my keys, and turned my back to them. As I walked down the aisle between rows of staring guests, they parted wordlessly, forming a path. The weight of their eyes on my back felt almost pleasant. After all, they were all witnesses to one of the greatest acts of foolishness in family history. I pushed open the heavy doors, shutting the chaos of the ballroom behind me. In the quiet corridor of the hotel, I drew in a deep breath, then let it out slowly. No sadness, no anger. Only thought. Cold, deliberate thought of which chess piece to move next. When I got into my car in the parking lot, I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I took out my phone and opened a folder in my cloud storage. A set of scanned contracts from every vendor for today's wedding. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the string quartet. All of them were, of course, under my name, the one who had handled every payment. I tapped a few times on the screen and launched a little program I'd prepared in advance. Then, one by one, I changed the contract holder field from my name to Tracy Irving and Aaron Irving. Perfect. All that remained was to send the updated contracts to the vendors. When the last file had been sent, I set my phone down in the console. By the time the night was over, as they toasted their happiness in the honeymoon suite, the vendors would begin contacting Mr. and Mrs. Irving for payment requests totaling more than $150,000. And that would only be the opening act. For the true finale, one last piece still had to move. I started the engine and drove quietly through the sleeping streets of Erie City. My destination, an old brick building downtown, a law office whose lights I knew would still be on. Chris Harrison, attorney at law. He was the one who would make my next move, and this entire game of retribution legally flawless. Chris was a seasoned lawyer who had once helped me when I was still drafting my own business plan, back before I sacrificed everything for my family. He had always believed in my talent, and he had been genuinely disappointed when I gave up my dream for their sake. If anyone could understand me now, it was him. I knocked on the heavy office door. From inside came his calm, familiar voice. "It's open." Inside, Chris sat surrounded by stacks of papers, lit only by the glow of his desk lamp. When he looked up and saw me, surprise flickered across his face. "Sarah, what brings you here at this hour? Isn't it your brother's—" He stopped mid-sentence, reading my expression. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "It seems something serious has happened." He rose from his chair, gestured toward the visitor's sofa, and poured me a cup of coffee. Holding the warm mug between my hands, I told him everything. The public humiliation at the reception. The betrayal that had begun years ago with the family business. And finally, what I had just done with the wedding contracts. When I finished, Chris didn't frown nor scold me. He simply nodded. Quietly. Firmly. "You did nothing wrong. On the contrary, you've endured remarkably well." And at that, something inside me, something long frozen and brittle, finally began to thaw. Chris's warm look prompted something in me to break, and words poured out as if a dam had burst. But this was not an inventory of past achievements. It was my closing argument, meant to prove the righteousness of my revenge. "Chris, do you know why I'll show no mercy? My savings have been treated as an endless family slush fund for years. Your family, they'd say, and my money would be tapped for small repairs to the store, to cover Aaron's tuition. The list goes on. I endured it because I believed, foolishly, that one day they would understand." I paused, then fixed my gaze on him. But this time it's different. That public execution at the reception wasn't an impulsive insult. It was a calculated opening move, meant to socially isolate me, render me powerless, and pave the way to legally seize the properties our grandfather left me. I'm certain of it. They plan to prey on my goodwill and squeeze every last thing from me. This is no longer something you can dismiss as family drama. My voice carried not anger, but cold resolve. So I will hesitate no longer. This is not a sentimental family quarrel. This is lawful self-defense to protect my life, my assets, and my dignity. They must be made to understand, through the force of the law, exactly what they have done, down to their bones. There was not a shred of doubt in my words. Chris looked me straight in the eye and quietly, but with firm conviction, said, "I understand, Sarah. Your resolve is clear. This is a fight for justice. Now let's map out a concrete plan of attack." His words rang like a powerful gong announcing the start of my campaign of retribution. He took a sip of his freshly poured coffee, returned to his desk, and pulled out a file. It was a copy of the deed paperwork from when I had inherited the properties from our grandfather years ago. He had always known everything, both as our family's longtime legal advisor and as my trusted confidant. "That move with the contract transfers was brilliant," Chris said, "but they're likely to refuse to pay and try to pin the liability on you. So our next move is to cut off their financial foundation entirely." I immediately knew what he meant by foundation. The properties my grandfather had left to me? Several buildings scattered across the city of Erie. Among them, the apartment where Aaron and Tracy were living as newlyweds, and the combined storefront and office space of Erie Grocery, where my brother played at being a businessman. Both, of course, legally belonged to me. Until now, you've leased those places to them for less than half the market rate. In legal terms, that's almost a form of gift. But a glint flashed behind his glasses. There's no reason for that goodwill to continue. Let's check the contracts. I'm fairly sure we included clauses about rent adjustment and termination. I nodded. Chris had drafted those contracts himself, and every possible contingency had been accounted for. Termination is allowed with 30 days' notice, and in cases of non-payment, immediate termination is possible. Exactly, Chris nodded. So, first, we terminate both leases effective today. The grounds, the complete destruction of trust, caused by their public defamation of you. That's a legally valid reason. At the same time, we'll demand the difference between the reduced rent and the market value, retroactively. And he pointed to another folder. The store renovation costs. You covered $50,000 out of your own pocket, and they've never repaid it. We'll claim that too. It'll be a tough case, but if we can show their malice, the court may well rule in your favor. A $150,000 wedding bill, an eviction from both their home and workplace, years of unpaid rent differences, and the outstanding renovation debt. Together, it was a flawless checkmate, enough to end their comfortable little world completely. I met Chris's gaze and spoke quietly, but with absolute clarity. Please teach them what the law really means. A few days later, I was still staying at a hotel in downtown Erie, waiting patiently for the pieces on the chessboard to fall into place. Then my phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. The first report came, ironically enough, from Tracy's cousin, who had attended the wedding as one of her guests. She had always been my friend long before Tracy entered our lives, and she'd never been fond of the Irving family's greed. Outraged by what had happened at the reception, she'd decided to stay close and observe their after-party, sending me live updates as the night unfolded. Her text messages read like scenes from a bad comedy movie. According to her report, the family had been discussing, champagne in hand, how to divide the fortune they expected to inherit after driving me out. Apparently, they truly thought that by cutting ties with me, my grandfather's inheritance would automatically fall into their hands. Their stupidity was almost impressive. Then the moment of truth arrived. The catering company just called Aaron, demanding $70,000. His face went white. One message after another arrived from my friend. Now Tracy's phone is ringing. The florist, $30,000. She's screaming. I never agreed to this. Oh my God, this is priceless. Now the band and the venue are calling too. Aaron's shouting into the phone. What do you mean the contracts are in our names? Total chaos here. My friend's play-by-play read like a live sports broadcast. They were trying to call me, of course, desperately, but I had no intention of answering. $150,000 in total. I imagined the chaos unfolding beyond her messages. The shouting, the panic, the disbelief. And quietly, with deliberate calm, I moved my queen forward one square on the chessboard. After that, my friend's updates began to sound less like commentary and more like reports from a spy thriller. Your family is too much, honestly, she wrote, barely containing her glee. First came Aaron's meltdown. After the phone calls, he'd apparently stormed into my old room at the family house in a rage. My friend said the noise was so loud it could be heard from outside, accompanied by his roaring voice, bellowing, "That woman!" Later, she peeked through the half-open door. There was a gaping hole in it, and inside, shattered furniture, broken frames, chaos. It looked like a tornado hit the place. Then came my mother Hillary's turn. She'd left the house in a flurry, declaring, "I have an idea." Her destination, the bank where she fancied herself well-connected. Curious, my friend followed from a distance. About 30 minutes later, Hillary emerged. Her face was pale as chalk, her steps unsteady, and not even the branch manager came out to see her off. No idea what happened, my friend wrote, but judging by the look on her face and the fact no one followed her out, it couldn't have been good. And that was how my friend's message ended. I could picture it all too clearly. She must have realized there, perhaps for the first time, just how much social standing she'd lost. As I read my friend's reports, a certainty settled over me. Everything they thought was their reputation was really a sandcastle built on top of my credit. And now that sandcastle had collapsed with a dreadful cascading roar. Once the bank had cut off their financing and they found themselves completely cornered, I instructed Chris to execute the second phase. He sent legally airtight documents, the immediate lease termination notice and eviction order, via certified mail to the apartment where Aaron and Tracy lived, as well as to the family home and store where my parents were staying. The question was, how did they react upon receiving the notices? That, too, was revealed to me by another ally, a salesman from one of the suppliers for Erie Grocery. He had long admired my skill in reviving the store and had always kept an eye on me. It so happened that he was visiting the store for a delivery when this scene of chaos unfolded. Aaron received a thick envelope from the postal worker and, at first, didn't even know what it was as he opened it. But as he unfolded the pages and his eyes traced the legal text, the color drained from his face. Termination of lease? Eviction notice? What the hell is this? At his scream, my parents came rushing out from the backyard. The three of them huddled around the papers. Then, as they grasped the meaning, a scream tore through the store. Hillary's voice, raw with disbelief. Evicted from the house and the store? How could something so absurd happen? Dan, shaking with fury, snatched his phone and called Chris's law office. But Chris, calm and precise as ever, gave only one answer. The contracts have been terminated. If you do not vacate within 30 days, the court will proceed with enforced removal. The real blow, however, was waiting at the bottom of the notice. A detailed breakdown of the claims. In addition to the $150,000 owed for the wedding, there was the $50,000 in renovation costs I had once covered for their store, and $80,000 in back rent, the difference between market value and the discounted rate they had enjoyed for years under the guise of family. $130,000 more in total. It was a merciless strike, one that would utterly crush the life out of them. Confronted with repeated bills and the reality of losing even their homes, the Irving family's sinking ship was teetering on the brink of total collapse. And like any sinking ship, it was obvious who would be the first to jump. Tracy. She had never loved Aaron. She had only ever loved the illusion of wealth behind his name, the glittering facade of the Irving fortune. That night, just hours after receiving Chris's letters, Tracy made her final move. My friend, her cousin, told me about it later, her voice half amused, half disgusted. "Let's have one last dinner together tonight," Tracy supposedly suggested to Aaron, tears in her eyes. Aaron, relieved that she hadn't abandoned him, went out and bought an expensive bottle of wine with his meager funds. But after he drank it and passed out drunk, Tracy's true nature emerged. All of her belongings had vanished from the room, leaving only a single note on the table that read, "Goodbye." Shortly after, my friend reportedly received a frantic call from Aaron. "Where's Tracy?" "Have you heard from her?" "Of course," my friend replied. "I don't know." But Aaron apparently continued shouting uncontrollably into the phone. "That damn woman! She took everything, my wallet, my savings, even the store's money. In a state of panic, he went around revealing to all their relatives the shameful truth that Tracy had run off with the money. Listening to my friend recount the story, I quietly sipped my coffee. There is no spectacle more absurd than villains betraying each other. Tracy had simply returned to them, in kind, exactly what Aaron and my family had done to me. Exploit, use, and discard without mercy once the value is gone. Truly, it was a fitting conclusion. What one deserves. Tracy's flight and the financial troubles Aaron had exposed himself created a double scandal. These two scandals swept through the small town of Erie in an instant, dealing the final blow to the social credibility of the Irving family. The same salesman who had reported on the store earlier shared another interesting update. Erie Grocery, now completely cut off from suppliers, could no longer receive any deliveries. Desperate, my father Dan went to the president of the city's largest wholesale company, a partner since my grandfather's generation, pleading for an advance on operating funds and to continue business. But the president's response was nothing like what he had hoped. The salesman, standing outside the office, reportedly overheard the entire exchange. Dan, there is nothing left for you. No money to borrow, no goods to sell. Nothing. When my father protested, we've had a long-standing relationship. The president calmly but firmly replied, you destroyed that long-standing relationship yourself. Years ago, when your store nearly went under, we continued our dealings because we trusted your daughter, Sarah, her skills and integrity. She faced each of us, presented concrete recovery plans, and kept her promises. You betrayed such a person. Do you think we can trust you now? Then, in front of my father, the president tore up the long-standing contract with a loud ripping sound. My father could only leave the office in defeat. They had mistaken all the networks and trust I had built as theirs to take. And now, having lost everything, they were forced to face the brutal reality of complete isolation. A month had passed since the wedding fiasco. During that time, I stayed in a hotel in Erie, quietly coordinating with Chris. Finally, I received the news that all legal measures were complete. I turned on my phone for the first time in a month. The screen lit up and a flood of notifications poured in. 6 missed calls. I put on my headphones and, one by one, listened to them with the calm detachment of a judge reading a verdict. The first was from Aaron, his voice frail and lacking confidence. Sarah, please, answer the phone. Why did you do this? We're finished. Next was my mother, Hillary, hysterically screaming, Sarah, because of you, we've lost everything. Come back and fix this immediately. My father, Dan's deep voice threatened, you ungrateful girl. If you don't drop all claims, you'll pay for it. The fourth was from Tracy, who had supposedly fled. Please, Sarah, forgive me. I was forced to give that speech by Aaron and your parents. I'm not to blame. Her transparent lies and self-preservation made my skin crawl. The fifth was from the lawyer they had hastily hired, exhausted from a hopeless defense. Sarah Irving, I am the representative of the Irving family. Is there any way we can explore a settlement? Finally, the sixth was again from Aaron, his voice now utterly hopeless, lifeless. Sarah, now I understand what you meant when you said, don't regret it. Having listened to all the messages, I deleted every piece of data without emotion. They had been completely ruined by the wedding invoices, eviction notices, and retroactive rent claims. There was nothing more I could do. Their fate was theirs to choose. Having erased all the messages, I headed to the airport. I had a one-way ticket to Asheville, North Carolina. I entrusted Chris with selling and managing the remaining properties in Erie. The proceeds would be the foundation for my new life. As the plane lifted, the city of Erie shrank below me, and I quietly reflected on the past month. They had underestimated me. They had believed I would silently forgive, remain exploited, and be a convenient tool. But the person they discarded was not a fragile eldest daughter. They had cut off the only lifeline they had depended on. Because my parents had guaranteed Aaron's debts, they were forced to sell the family home. Tracy had abandoned Aaron early on and disappeared. And Aaron remained, burdened by massive debt, abandoned even by his parents. Their future lives no longer concerned me. Eventually, the plane landed at Asheville Airport, surrounded by the Green Mountains. Here, I would take a dream I had once abandoned and realize it for myself alone. I would never look back. With determined steps, I walked toward the arrival gate, facing a new life. Years later, in Asheville, in a sunlit office overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, I reviewed the final design for my company logo. Years after that cursed wedding, I had established a marketing consulting firm specializing in regional revitalization, earning the trust of many clients. I no longer cared about the Irving family. According to Chris's final report, my brother had declared bankruptcy, whereabouts unknown. My parents lived in a small apartment, constantly bickering. Their story had ended exactly as they had chosen.